Hello, listeners. It's another episode of the Goalimpact Football Opinions Podcast. Today, again in English. I think was a long time ago since I had an English-speaking guest here. But speaking of, I'm very, very happy and appreciate your time to talk to you today, Hadi. Hadi Sotudeh, is that pronounced correctly? Okay. Yeah, great. Has something like a dream PhD or dream scientific academic career, because he's dealing in the ETH Zurich with football analytics in the most fundamental sense. And so he fits very well into our podcast. And so I'm very, very happy to welcome you, Hadi.
Okay, thanks very much.
As always, and I told you that already, we are beginning with the guest before we dive into the deep topics of football. So maybe you might begin introducing yourself. Who are you? And especially always, what are your football origins? How did the game catch you?
Okay, great. So, I'm Hadi Sotudeh. I'm right now a doctoral student at ETH Zurich, working on studying team tactical formations with event and tracking data, and basically looking into team formations from a network or graph perspective. But coming to how I ended up being here, it goes back really to 2018 when I was in the Netherlands. After my master's studies, I was in a program called PDH. It was a 2 years program in university, basically a postmaster's program, where I had the flexibility or freedom to see which aspect of data science I'm interested in. So I remember in back those days, I was thinking about if I want to, or when I graduate from the university, do I want to become a data scientist in a financial sector, or I'm interested in being a data scientist like in a manufacturing, in a company like that, or in the software industry. So really thinking deep about these aspects and what I want to do with my life after the graduation. And because the program gave us the flexibility to spend 15 hours per week on the area that we are interested in ourselves, I just said I would just give it a try, see if data and football can work together. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, I will not regret later on that I didn't, let's say, explore this area. So I remember back those days, I only had a master's in data science, just general courses like data mining, machine learning, but no experience in football, except from that I was watching football and maybe in the weekends play with some friends. So what I did was just try to approach people who work in the industry via social media, sending them message, basically asking them for some guidelines, some roadmap for someone who has some understanding about data science, but doesn't know anything about how data have been used or is used in football, in the industry. And I got some messages back from data scientists who work for football clubs. So they gave me, for example, a bunch of papers to go over or articles. I remember one of them told me to just start working on a project myself and try to ask a question or basically answer a question that is of my interest using the data that is available online. And in that way, over time, you can learn by doing with the project, and also build a CV for yourself and also get recognized in this field. So back in 2018, I started doing that, printing papers. I remember going into the library in the weekends and Saturdays, just reading papers. In the beginning, I was not really understanding what's happening in some of those papers. Maybe I still don't understand. That's a great discussion about scientific papers in general. But then in 2019, there was a competition by Paris Saint-Germain, PSG. It was a sports analytics competition where they provided event data from the French league, and basically 3,000 participants entered into that competition to win the grand prize, which was doing a PhD with Paris Saint-Germain in collaboration with the École University in Paris. So I also was one of the participants in that competition. And after multiple rounds, I made it to the final where we got access to the tracking data of the French league to look for the successful pressing patterns with like data analytics techniques. I basically use machine learning algorithm for that. And I had my presentation in Paris, in their stadium, in the summit that they had, met Thomas Tuchel there while getting some prizes. And so while I didn't win the grand prize in that competition, I got the third rank, but I think it was a very positive moment back in my career, because when I came back to the Netherlands, that helped basically that I do a 1-year thesis, or basically the study that I was involved back in the Netherlands to do my 1-year thesis for the Performance and Technology Department of the Dutch Football Association. True, of course, in the football industry, it's always that you know someone who knows someone. So I had basically, I was really lucky in the university. We had a professor whose friend was working was in the Dutch FA, and through that connection, and also because of my own activities and interests, I got the opportunity to do the 1-year thesis for the Dutch FA, their performance department. And so the thesis took 1 year and I graduated. And after that, I remember after some months, I started working with the Dutch FA to just deploy the solution that I developed to put it into late production. So I work with them as a consultant, freelancer in part-time fashion until Euro 2020. And that was the moment my collaboration ended with them. And after some months, there was a job position announced at ETH, PhD in basically sports analytics, soccer analytics. That's the correct term that was announced. And so I just
They call it soccer or football analytics?
Well, I think to just make sure some people don't confuse it with American football. So that job announcement was soccer analytics. So everyone understands, no matter where they are. Maybe some people don't like the term, but at least there is no confusion around it. So I also applied for that position, and from January 2022, I'm in this program, the PhD studies at ETH in Switzerland.
A great introduction. Thank you for that. You said something I just want to grab. You said reading scientific papers is a topic in and of itself. I actually share that experience with you, which was also why I said you are familiar with Richard Feynman, I think, right? The famous physicist, which is I think he won also the Nobel Prize. But anyway, he said something like, if you cannot explain it to a 5-year-old, you didn't really understand. So sometimes I jokingly said, if people write papers and you cannot read them, they just hide their own inadequacies in their own understanding. So
I feel that it's intentional, so they really don't want to read maybe everything.
Maybe that's
scientific paper, and then they just remains. So they just put some holes that you cannot read connected points when you read a paper, and you cannot reproduce what is there, or you don't understand the reason or rationale behind some decision that they have made. It's maybe arbitrary. So so that's really some difficulty I personally have with a lot of scientific papers in this field.
I agree with you here, definitely. Okay, so you dive now into the academic part, but you told me upfront that you are from Iran, so I guess you had a football relationship there as well in your childhood, or
so there is a club in the capital called Istiklal. I think the translation in English, the literal translation is something like independence. So I was a fan of that club. I still follow them more or less. I was back in the childhood. But so I remember knowing names of a lot of players, and talking about them. And back in those days, one of my friends told me, really, what's the point of knowing all the history behind any specific player? It's not gonna make a career for us or something like that. And I maybe agreed with him at that point. But yeah, for a lot of people, maybe it just remains as a hobby or football match that you watch in the weekend. And maybe for a few people, I think it becomes like a career.
Which is a gift. I at least in from my perspective and my experience, I really feel that it's a gift.
I think it's similar or same as any other field. It owns pros and cons. So yeah, at least the positive side is that you maybe work on a topic that you feel passionate about. But there are also some negative aspects that maybe at some point in the rest of the podcast we can touch some parts.
True. I mean, I had Matthias Seidel from Transfermarkt on our show, since Transfermarkt is a partner of ours. And he also said, like, okay, when you're in the business of football, you also get to know the dark side. So there was one negative part. But all right, I think we covered you as a person. So now maybe we can cover science or data science and football. I think one thing we both share is that football is a complex system, right? And we should maybe elaborate what actually a complex system means before we dive into what data can do and how data can be used and how it should be used. So maybe how I'm asking you, how would you define a complex system, or especially football as a complex system?
So then let's just look and have a very simple perspective to football. So it seems that there are a lot of noise involved when you watch a football match. Like the player just makes a mistake, or there is a deflection, or there is a cross or there is a shot that was intended to be a cross, and at the end it became a shot and ended in a goal. So all these noises, I think, makes it a complex system really to study. There are a lot of different variables involved, like the mental aspects of the players. There is a team effort. It's not really only one player, so there is a collective behavior on the pitch that we see. And really, if you look at the football match, it's you can really break it down to smaller pieces. Like you have a football match, but then there is a piece like set pieces. There are some pieces like you have in position, you're out of position. You have different player positions on the pitch, goalkeepers, defenders. So I think all these aspects really makes it very complex to study. And I remember there is, I think, last year when Ralph Rangnick was the interim coach at Manchester United, he had a post-match interview, and he was, I think, not exactly quoting, but more or less what he was saying is that, let's say, 50% of the match is noise and all these aspects that you cannot really control. But let's say 50%, the rest is there is a pattern. So it's really about training. With getting prepared, you can really get those 50%. And we just want to make sure that we at least have the control of that 50%, that we know that it's not about noise or anything else. So I think that's also what coaches want to achieve, while they know that maybe unlike other sports, maybe basketball or baseball, where you can have less noise, let's say, here you have more noise, and it makes it maybe more complex to study.
Yeah, definitely. I think Chris Anderson and in his book The Numbers Game says something like 50% of a goal is basically random. I don't know honestly how he comes up with that idea, but one thing is which is quite funny is that I argue that the randomness in football, which you just elaborated on, is actually the attractive part. We know that from gambling studies, basically, right? I mean, gambling is an addiction. And why is it addictive? Because it's the reward is completely random. And so probably natural life in general is random, and so it mimics the game mimics this natural environment, which is why I believe football is on a biochemical note really so attractive. How I used to explain the complexity is always usually causality is A causes B, right? It's an arrow in time in a sense. And the more interdependent variables you add, the more different arrows you overlay over each other, and hence causality in this interdependent network hides in a sense. I mean, you can separate then small aspects of the game like set pieces, which I think are gameable in a sense. But overall, this game remains really, really interdependent, and I think that is what is actually so lovely about the game. And I agree with Rangnick in that regard, that you should focus on the 50% you can actually control.
Yeah, and also regarding that 50%, I think there are a lot of easy hanging fruits.
Nope.
You just talked about set pieces, so I remember there is another talk Ralph Ragnick has. He says that 30% of the goals are scored from set pieces, and he asks whether coaches really spend 30% of their training for set pieces, and the answer is no. So it just with stuff that are really controllable. So set pieces are really a situation that you can control. It's not really. So the ball is really on the ground, or it's a throw-in. It's something that we practice, and the numbers also show that maybe the reward that you can get from them are high, and maybe is significant to spend the same amount of time, like 30% of your training for those aspects.
Yeah. Other low-hanging fruits you have in mind?
Regarding I think set pieces when it comes to the on-pitch performance, really. But later on, when we want to maybe go over what data can do for a football club, I can also maybe mention one example there for a football club as a business operation.
That's interesting, because I would say the knowledge is already there, but the application in the clubs and in the training is lacking, which is very funny, because there's so much money in football.
Yeah, so I think money really goes. So the wages that clubs pay to the players, I think that's where really most of the money really the clubs spend, and also in the transfer market. So then less remains maybe for the other departments in the club or other functions. Also, the impression that the football has a lot of noise and randomness, maybe also more difficult for some clubs to really want to go over and think about long term when it comes to make use of maybe data to try to at least get their hands on these handling fruits that I mentioned.
But there is change going on, and we will talk about that in a few minutes. Maybe first of all, so we covered now the complex system idea, and in order to tame the complexity, humans develop models, right? All models in general are wrong. That's scientific truth. But through iteration, through improvement of our models, through how we understand the world, we can actually grasp the world, or in that case, football, better. So you said in the beginning that you were focused on network science in football. Can you explain for the general listener what is network science and how is it related to football?
Yeah, so I think if we want to, I think maybe for the listeners, it's easy to start with a model that maybe they see a lot when they are following a football match. And I want to, in this case, talk about like expected goals for them. So I think maybe it's easier to follow and understand what I want to explain about models. So if you just think about like an expected goal models that you see after a match, the statistics, basically it wants to tell us or it wants to describe the chances that each team had. And as you said, it's a useful model, but we need to also be aware of the limitations that a model has. For example, XG is built or based on the shots that a team takes. So maybe you have a chance, but you don't really turn it into a shot. So it's not captured into an XG model or XG value that you see after a match. Or you can think about that the XG models, what we see are built for an average player. So they are not really player specific. So it really doesn't matter whether an Erling Haaland is behind the ball in an XG model, or you have, I don't know, a player in the third division in an unknown country. The XG model is going to tell you that the probability of scoring this goal for an average player is like 0.3. So just knowing all these constraints, how the models are built, and also I think another limitation about XG models. So I think this is just one example to just, you can think about any other model and their constraints and limitations that they have. For example, if you think about an XG model, you have two shots. Consequently, the first one is just saved by the goalkeeper, but not completely. So you have the rebound. In the statistics, you will see that both shots and the XGs are summed up together. And maybe we think it's just really one chance. It's just the first one was not, the save from the first one led to the second shot.
Yeah.
So if we don't really carefully and precisely look and consider when we want to really make use of these models, it can just, at the end we get some results, but whether those results are precise enough is something to be aware of.
Yeah, this is the great summary, because the expected goals is exactly one point I like to critique when people make it in the kind of ultimate or whatever, and still also the expected goals model progresses. Currently we are seeing this I don't know if it's expected goals chain, is it called like that? Right.
So market trend variations, like we see it, but at whole, like we have expected pass, we have expected assist. So all based on expected, you just create different expected models for different parts of a match. Each of them they are useful, but we when we are using them, just be aware of how they are built, what was the assumptions or limitations, and how we can maybe make the most use of them.
Yes, and also one thing I want to emphasize, because we just talked about the complexity of the game. The complexity implies a dynamic situation, and the dynamic situation also implies that a new situation can be and actually must be different than any other past happening. I mean, with statistical analysis, you can still extract out the average, right? But the new situation will always bring something different within. So there is nothing like an absolute knowledge of the situation, which at least I see sometimes when people from an not data background or not an academic scientific background think you want to determine this entire game into numbers, but a true scientist actually knows that it's not really possible.
Yeah, there are different aspects to the game, and we are really focusing only on the on-pitch performance of the players. We are really not taking into account a lot of noise or mental aspects that are involved. We want to simplify it, and it's going to be useful to study some aspects.
Yeah, and I think that was the initial point how we both met, right? There was I think you tweeted or you posted this Bernardo Silva Guardiola interview about Bernardo Silva, and was like the numbers. I think he was talking about scorer points, I guess, for Bernardo Silva are not that high. So how do you justify that he basically always plays and is one of the favorite players of Guardiola? And Guardiola says it's something is like you cannot measure it, and that exactly captures the spirit of the complexity that Guardiola obviously understands.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you cannot really capture the contribution that this player has based on the number of goals and assists, which is basically because that player, that's not the expectation from that player. And then it just brings us to the question, okay, how we can measure the contribution a specific player has on the pitch. And I think one way to do that, there are different proposals, let's say. You can do that. One way is that, for example, you look into a sequence of actions that players take in like a possession, and you want to like build a model, maybe it's machine learning or whatever, that gives assigns each action and value based on how much that action contributes to a goal in the next, for example, take 10 actions, or how much it contributes in not conceding a goal in the next 10 actions.
Yeah.
So then also, I think there is also one approach that maybe you can clarify or maybe also explain it.
Yeah, I think this is basically what we from Goalimpact more or less in a sense do. Maybe one side note back. So what we do believe is we actually go back to the Greek origins of science in a sense, because I at least I like to joke with that. But it was like because of the complexity, we do not believe that you can, in an absolute sense, know why a player is good. So this is the complexity element, and but what you can know actually, or what you can do is you can measure good. And how do we do that? And maybe Bernardo Silva is a great example for that, because he's like also one of the best players according to our system in the Premier League. What we do is basically we measure the correlation of a player and his playing time with his score, right? So let's say Bernardo Silva plays the first half, and then is exchanged for another player, and he won his half with 3-0. That would bring his score basically up. And as you said, often when you just have one game, that would be noise, right? And with a lot of data, you can basically extract out the signal in that sense. And so what we do is basically, from a top-down perspective, we just look at the correlation of score and playing time of a player, which comes from the plus-minus score in basketball, which you are definitely aware of. The difference to Goalimpact is that in the plus-minus score you have one disadvantage, and it in my opinion it's a huge disadvantage, which is if you play against a bad team and bad players and you have a high score, that doesn't mean anything, because it actually means you played against bad players. So there is no relativity of the opponent's strength. And we take into account basically the opponent's strength, which is why the Goalimpact is a relative score. But as the difference is, if you take specific patterns of movement, collective or individual movements, right, or behaviors with the ball, if you analyze the game, you get more resolution basically in specific actions. We lose that obviously completely, because we say we don't know really why a player is good. And my favorite example is really, and I think Bernardo Silva again is a perfect example for that, is counter-pressing or gegenpressing. Let's say you have an offensive player and he loses like 9 out of 10 offensive dribblings. Everybody would say, yeah, he always loses the ball. But let's say he's the insane counter-pressing, because he really, I mean, counter-pressing in my understanding is most fundamentally... Oh, sorry, you're still there? Okay. So Bernardo Silva was the example. Counter-pressing for me actually is how quickly do you change in your mind from attacking to defending, in a sense, and you don't hesitate with the prior losing of the ball. And Bernardo Silva is really, and Bernardo Silva is really, really good at counter pressing, for example. So he might lose the ball a couple of times. I don't think he does, but let's assume he does. But he wins the ball very, very quickly after he loses it. And so this captures somehow the problem of what data is important or what data is relevant. And maybe you can take over now. How do you answer that question?
Yeah, I think it depends on what part you want to study and what aspects you want to study. So, and also, as you mentioned, there are some challenges when it comes to the data. Accessibility is one challenge. So if you want to look for, you have like wide accessibility and scalability on different countries, different leagues, and different age groups. So you will go with the data that is more accessible, like the lineups, like match scores. But if you go with event data and if you move to the like tracking data and GPS, so as far as you go forward, then you can really cover only specific maybe countries or matches, age groups. So maybe the more detailed data that you want to get access to, the coverage that you can have is just going to be limited.
Yeah. So this is why as I said, it's somehow an uncertainty principle in data, is something like that. In complex system, I mean, we have in quantum mechanics the uncertainty principle, right? The smallest part, if you determine where they are, you don't know how fast they are, or vice versa. And in a complex system, you have also a similar effect. The more you determine and the more you look at one specific part, the more you lose the generality. So I think it's a very interesting endeavor, and which brings me to the next question. Since we talked now about data and also potentialities and dangers, and we see now, in a sense, an inflation. So the market reacts to data and buys. Some clubs buy everything in data. Where do you see that journey going on? So what do you expect in the next 10 years with the data?
Yeah, I think, as you said, there are different sources of data, and maybe there are some even that maybe in the next few years we will hear more about them, like skeletal tracking data or virtual reality that we probably have seen some examples in the media. And yeah, I think, as you said, more data sources will probably pop up. But I think really here, the danger is that while we have not made the most use of the data that we already had, and we may jump into and get excited about the new data and new innovations that come up and want to make use of them. So I think that's one danger. And another one, I think it's more about in general the usage of data, is that we see a lot of like statistics like pass completion rate or running stats that we see in the media. I think mainly like the kilometers that play around and hit play is just stopped. So I think the really important is that we have more context about those numbers or what we already are doing with the data. So just going back to the passing rate. So I think just 1 or 2 weeks ago, there was an interview by De Bruyne, and he was saying that like pass completion percentage is just one of the useless stats. But I also agree with him, because he says if I have like all of them might have this backward and sides, then I will get like 97% completion rate. But yeah, that's not I'm here supposed to do. I'm here to play like passes that are valuable, let's say. So then that's why when we have those completion rates, should we really consider the passes that defenders gave to each other as same as passes that are maybe more valuable, or whether this KPI that we have designed, pass completion rate, is useful? Maybe we can add more context. For example, we say what's the pass completion rate of passes that the player had under pressure. So maybe both passes are important. It shows how a player is capable of coping with pressure. That is maybe a skill, but not really the number of passes. So you can just increase the number of passes you have, or if you are playing in a team position-based team, then you will end up having a lot of passes and you just increase your stats. So that's why I think context is really important to have, and we don't see it in a lot of the stats. Another one is I mentioned the running numbers we see. So yeah, the player ran like, I don't know, 15 kilometers, but
Messi doesn't run a lot.
Yeah, and also true that's exactly. So from which players we really, it's about the position and expectation they have from the players. So it doesn't really mean you ran a lot. It was a good thing. Maybe you didn't have the ball and you just were forced to run to get the ball back from the team who had the ball position. I think there is I think a belief that the team who have the ball position they run less than the teams who don't have the ball position.
But that's not true. No, not necessarily, right?
Yeah. So it's like, so really the context. So whether you have the ball, you didn't have the ball, and whether you were defending, in which phase of the game. So all this stuff gives more context and maybe makes the number or statistics that we have maybe more valuable.
Which brings me to another guest. We had Christoph Biermann, so he wrote Football Hackers. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but he has in his title the science and art of football data, something like that. And the point would be that you still have to have a person or an intelligence, at least, behind who needs to make sense out of the data. Otherwise, you treat them all equally, which won't do you any good, right? I mean, you can focus on wrong data, as we said, passing accuracy or dribbling success or whatever, but you miss entirely what the game is all about fundamentally, which is winning it, right? So I think the next 10 years will be interesting because there will be a lot of money flooding the data market in football, and then sorry,
we hope so.
Yeah, we hope so. I really believe that because there is too much money going around in football and they won't waste that opportunity. So from a market perspective, I cannot see it going differently. But I also suspect there will be a bubble popping up. As always when things are new and knowledge has to first emerge, how to use these things. Then after a period of when the enthusiasm drops, we would see a bubble as well. I think we covered basically all of our initially agreed topics. But I asked you initially about your football club in Iran. You remember Interdependence. Sorry. Interdependent was the complex system of variables.
Yeah, independence is the literal translation.
Yeah. Maybe we should. Maybe after that podcast, it should be interdependent independence, which would be a nice one. But anyway, no. But I wanted to ask you if Hadi Sotudeh would be the boss of Independence. Well, how would he restructure the club and what would you do? I mean, especially regarding data, but if you have other creative ideas, feel free to.
I think maybe one can look at the football club like any business. So I don't see that much difference when you look at the football club. It's just a business that you're running. It's just in the sports industry, and if you want to make use of data, then maybe you can learn lessons from other industries. So maybe what you do, you just come up with a roadmap and how you want to make use of data in your business. So maybe the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you use the data to monitor all the critical, let's say, aspects and functions of your club. Just monitor them, make sure that everything comes through maybe a dashboard. You see the KPIs that are relevant for you, and you just make sure that everything is on track so nothing gets unnoticed. And then maybe the next step comes to really try to get some insights from those KPIs that you have in maybe your dashboard, and later on you go and maybe make some decisions to optimize. So I think it's like a roadmap, and then you look into the club structure, organizational chart, like any other business, to if you want to form, assuming that there is no department or there is no team really for data in a club. And I think what's also important, it goes maybe more to the cultural aspects. You look into the club and the history before that, before you arrive, there was a successful project in terms of data, maybe a small project, but you just get the reports, look into the archive and see what was the reason that the project became a success, or if there was a failure, what was the reason. I think those can help you really along the way that you go forward.
Yeah.
And then it comes really about creating a team, having a department, and really thinking about the different use cases that data can have for the club. So you can think, I don't know, about the match analysis, social media, recruitment, the scouting. So there are different use cases, but you need to see which ones maybe are more feasible based on the human resources you have, the data availability, the difficulty to implement, and also which ones provide you more value in terms of course, it's a business, so you look for the financial input. And you have like a matrix. There are two dimensions, visibility and financial value. And then you just basically locate and rank the use cases that you have identified. And I would say probably you identify these use cases, player recruitment and scouting comes first.
Yeah, because it would be interesting for us.
Yeah, I think financial impact is clear. So when a club makes a wrong decision or a right decision, so I think it's more visible than maybe, I don't know, match analysis. Maybe it's more difficult to measure the contribution that data can have in terms of money for the match analysis, but it's more easier to do that for let's say recruitment and scouting. And then assuming that, okay, the scouting recruitment is, let's say, the easy hanging fruit that you want to go with. So you just identify the different data sources that you need. As you said, you can just start with simple just lineups and you know the match score, and then you can just go with the plus minus ranking and or all impact, as you said, when you have that use case, you prove the value maybe to your boss in a club so that you get the support for next project, really, and other use cases. I think, as you said, there are different data sources to consider: video, event data, tracking data, match data, the match score and lineups, physical data, coding data. I think coding data is just what we have video and performance analysts just having matches with some customized concepts that usually coaches expect their team to maybe follow, and they cannot or don't have access to those data in other data sources. That's why they want to collect them themselves.
Yeah.
And so you have all these sources of data. When you have really got the backing of the CEO maybe or sporting director in the club to really invest long-term in the data department, assuming that usually what happens is that they first want to have like a demo project or a pilot project to see the value and make the decision later on whether they want to invest to have a dedicated department. So player recruitment is the demo project really to convince them, and later on, hopefully they're convinced. You get the backing in terms of the budget, then you can go and identify the right data sources. You have like a database. All these different sources are there. They are synchronized. They are basically connected to each other. And based on that database, you can build different, I don't know, it's a monitoring dashboard. It's something that your video and performance analysts are looking for, or you are looking for like statistics for player recruitment. And even it can have some applications, I think, in the social media for other departments. So you are not really restricted only into the football side, but you are helping the business as the whole.
Yeah, lovely, really lovely. I think we can make that. We can cut that part out and say something like a video CV from Hadi, how he applies to any to restructure the data of any club. Was really great, because what you actually said, there are packages, right, and you can structure them, and there's a hierarchy how you could actually then move forward. That was really good. Let us finish with another personal question. Assuming your PhD goes successful, where do you see you in I don't know, how long does your PhD take? 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? It's different in various terms. I don't know, but let's say 5. Is it 5 reasonable, or 3?
Let's say four.
Okay, 4. Where do we see you? Where do we see you in 4 years? So in an ideal case.
I think from now it's like 2 years and a half or something like that.
Okay.
I think it's a long term to really have a prediction on what happens.
Sure.
With life, a lot of ups and downs. So I don't have any comment on that. Let's see how it goes. So enjoy the moment, and yeah.
Really great ending. Hadi, it was an extreme pleasure to talk to you. I'm pretty sure we do it again at one point. And maybe last point, how can listeners reach you? What's the best way to reach out in terms of football opportunities or whatever?
Yeah, so I think the best way really is to reach out via my LinkedIn. So I think maybe you can also put the URL down.
I will.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
So people can just go over the post that I wrote, the timeline. So what happens is that if I find something interesting, I usually put there. We also, also the head teaching assistant for the stock analytics course that here we have at ETH Zurich. So what I was doing basically during the course, I was putting lecture summaries from my own perspective on my LinkedIn, so people can also check there. And if I see any job opportunity like internships or positions announced by clubs, or maybe it's a player recruitment agency, or maybe it's a media outlet, I try to share live or post it. So for the people who are interested in those job positions, they can reach out. I myself don't offer any job position, as you know, in academia you're yourself in an education program.
Ivory Tower.
Yeah.
I'm
not really hiring. But if I see anyone is hiring in this field, I usually try to share it on my timeline.
Perfect. Again, as I said, it was a pleasure. I think we were good with the timing, couple of minutes more than said. But
I so that's why I am more a fan of short podcasts than the long ones that go for 1 hour and a half or 2 hours.
Yeah, but I hope the flow I had and hopefully you had will also how do you say?
Boring, so you don't stop after 10 minutes or
exactly. Yeah,
maybe you should have that in the beginning, but okay. I hope you came and listened until the end. Yeah.
Yeah, great. All right. Again, listeners, thank you, and of course, hit a like button or give us a rating on Spotify or YouTube. And Hadi, was a real pleasure to meet you digitally. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Bye bye.